Well, if you, like me, loved the book The Shack, then you are really going to enjoy this conversation that I just had with William Paul Young, who is the author of The Shack. He has got a new book coming out in October, Return to the Shack. And I had the privilege of reading an advanced version of that book and just really loved it. So, in this conversation, of course, we talked theology. Of course, we talked about ideas about God and the ways in which the shack kind of overturned people's images of God and suggested alternatives and alternative metaphors for thinking about God. We talked about the great sadness and the human struggles that were such a core part of the shack and also part of this return to the shack. And just the way that fiction can do more than theology in terms of the nonfiction writing. And we just talked a lot about love, about God, about the human heart, the human journey. And I love this conversation. I love Paul Young. He is one of the kindest and most loving people that I have ever met. And it's an honor and a privilege for me to welcome him to the Sacred Everywhere. And so I know that you will enjoy this conversation and welcome in to the Sacred Everywhere. Welcome to the Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. All right, welcome William Paul Young to the Sacred Everywhere. I'm so glad to have you with me here today.
Honored to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Well, we met in 2017 at the Trinity Conference sponsored by the
Yep.
Center for Action and Contemplation with Richard Rohr, and you
Yep.
were one of the speakers there, along with Cynthia Bourgeault,
hmm
and of course Richard Rohr, who has just been a favorite of mine in terms of how he articulates the Christian story, and
He's a fantastic human being
yeah.
and very authentic, very honest about his own journey,
Mm-hmm.
um, very honest about his own character, including flaws. And he he is just a sweet, unassuming, perceptive, brilliant mind. Now,
Yeah.
Cynthia Bourgeault. Now there's a firecracker. Let me
Yeah.
also incredibly brilliant. I loved that conference.
Mm-hmm.
I was so honored to be a part of that. And
Yeah.
it's one of those memories that has really stuck with me because of how unique it was.
It was, in fact, I was just recently, I think maybe they only recently posted videos from that conference, so they showed up in my YouTube feed. And
Wow.
I was re-listening to them, and I felt like I was getting even more out of the recordings this time around than I did while I was sitting there in
Yeah.
the audience.
Well, you've moved. And
You're right.
yeah. So I people ask me all the time, why is it that when I read The Shack now, I see stuff that I've never seen before. And I say, you moved. You know,
Right.
the mountain remains the mountain, but it depends on where you are as to what you
Right.
see.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so, there's so much out there anymore. So much good things to engage with, so much creative work that people are doing.
Yeah.
And the amount of information that is at our disposal is quite overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a kind of important to just back off a little bit and then relate moment by moment to what is actually in front of me.
Yeah.
And I mean, Richard would love that. He would love that line, and
Yeah.
because he's all about the ever-present, eternal now, which I think is the only way to actually live. So
Right, right. And then, that reminds me of, then later you and I had brunch in Tennessee, and
Yep.
then I invited you to the University of the South to do a workshop there.
Yep.
And I remember riding with you in my car, and I was crying on your shoulder, unloading my own personal struggles, and you talked about the grace sufficient for the day.
Yep.
And that
Actually,
has,
and I've changed that a little bit.
okay.
I'm down to the moment. Uh,
Oh,
the day, the day has turned into too long a time,
yeah.
and so, but the day can be the moment, and the day can be
Mhm.
longer than the moment, and the moment can be longer than a day. So, I guess it's intertwined. But yes, I remember.
Yeah, yeah. And that was a beautiful, beautiful time. I was so glad to have been able to have you come and do that workshop there.
Yeah, it was amazing. Um, I had a gal write me an email, and she said, this is referring to the grace for the moment, and she said, I don't know if you remember, but we went out to lunch, and I basically dumped my life on you, all my fears, all my burdens, all of that. And
Mm.
she said, you sat there and you listened to it, and then at the end you said, so, is there anything that you can actually do about any of this at this moment? And she said, so I thought about it, and then I said, well, no. And you said, well, then pass the salt. And she says, every time I start to future trip, creating
Yeah.
imaginations that don't exist, trying to solve problems that don't exist, trying to get grace from God for things that don't exist, I hear,
Mm.
pass the salt.
That's the
And
salt.
yeah, because it's real. I mean, it's
Right.
tangible. It's like this pen, right? It's here and now and real compared to all the kinds of fear-driven tragedy, creating imagination that a lot of us spend our time with. Not creative imagination in the beautiful sense of childlikeness and wonder and creativity and adventure and all of that, invention but but creating those internal uh, anticipations of things that actually don't exist, but we make them very real to ourselves.
Right.
And then, we hear somewhere in the distance Jesus saying, "Be anxious for nothing. Take no thought for tomorrow. It's got enough issues of its own." And we're like, "But if I actually trust you, it feels so irresponsible."
Right, right. Like, won't everything just fall apart?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
we
saw
think.
this thing that said, it was a funny cartoon, and it said 99% of everything I worry about never happens. See, it's working. I think that's tremendously funny. It's
Yeah.
working. So, yeah, if you have a bad habit and it becomes predictable, something's happening, but this worry stuff, man, be anxious for
Yeah,
nothing. If you leave the present moment, the present tense, you start to die because
right.
you're engaging with something that actually doesn't exist.
It's
And
like you're unplugging from the actual flow of life when you
absolutely.
start getting into the
The
future or the
actual
past.
flow. Yeah, where does
Right.
God actually live with you? In an
Right.
imagination that doesn't exist, and a lot of times I think our prayers about thing are, telling God to solve things that don't exist. And God's like, it doesn't exist. what, what are you praying about? You're
Right.
asking me to solve something that actually doesn't exist.
Right.
And I'm right here. I'm with you. Abide in me. In the
Yeah.
presence is fullness of joy. All the things that are real are always in the present tense. That's eternal life.
Right. Right. Oh, that's so beautifully said. So beautifully said. Well, you have in the past, I'm sure, in many conversations shared the whole story of the writing of the shack. And so I don't know that we need to revisit the whole story, but I just will remind people of how you never expected you wrote something initially for your friends and family and never had any imagination that what happened with the shack would happen.
No,
And
none at all.
yeah.
It
And
was
and
it
I'm
was
just
wild.
yeah, and so I say more about that, but I also want to put it in the context of, we in a time like say the 1960s, theologians like Paul Tillich were writing for the public, and many people were reading people like that. That's not true anymore. And I'm just wondering, as you think about what happened with the shack, is it possibly true that now theology in the form of fiction is actually more powerful than theologians' writings?
It's always been more powerful,
Yeah.
always. And I think that's why parables are so powerful. Fiction, art in general, it creates a space that is bigger on the inside than on the outside. And
Mm.
if it wants to remain art, you have to trust people to hear what they hear. And it's an invitation to hear what you hear, right? So
Mm.
it's actually trying to expand space. Now,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
now, nonfiction, and I love nonfiction, by the way, but nonfiction is trying to reduce space. It wants to convince you that the way I see things are the way you should be seeing things. And so we lost the ability to do art. And I'm not, there are always exceptions. But generally speaking, like in literature, we have some exceptions, and a lot of them were women, by the way, in the last 50 years. But we had this spate of the Inklings and Lewis and George MacDonald and um, um a whole raft of people, Dorothy Sayers,
Mm-hmm.
Charles Williams, Chesterton, all of these people that were writing both.
Mm.
And suddenly it's like you're either fiction writers or you're nonfiction writers. And
Yeah.
what happened was, to a large degree, is that Christians began to try to bury agenda inside of works of fiction. And when
Uh-huh.
you do that, your art becomes propaganda, and
Oh.
it acts like nonfiction, except it's kind of like multi-level marketing, where there's always an agenda hidden inside, and you
Yeah.
begin to lose relationship, and you begin to lose presence and lose the power to speak of any coherent and beautiful way.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, it's like, why? It's sort of what happened with Christian music. We had incredible musicians who weren't Christian musicians, but had the ear of uh, of humanity, in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, and they
Mm-hmm.
still do. And then we had the Christians who were trying to bury some kind of an agenda inside of it, and as the system of marketing and merchandising and all of that began to grow up, there was less availability and accessibility to the beauty of art.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's changing now. Um, Suddenly, because of technology and a whole lot of other things, people are able to express who they are within the context of creative work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got its good things and it's got its downside and all of this, but technology in general has a spirit within it that's not good. And so,
Yeah, it
it,
can
it
for
tends
sure.
it tends to reshape culture around the necessity of its existence.
Mm.
So when you had the automobile show up, now we have a society that's absolutely based on that kind of transportation. Or when the
Right.
telephone showed up, or when the computer showed up, or when you have these big shifts in technology, we're going to have AI, and it's going to refashion culture and the world in a way that absolutely necessitates its existence. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and those are the principalities and powers, right? They tend to take on a life of their own as if they're a living thing, and then they turn on you. And
Mm. Right.
but
Or they enslave you into a way of being that all of a sudden has cut off the
yeah,
richness of
and it
life.
becomes normalized,
Yeah.
right? So it's normal, and uh, and art is always the the child that's saying that the emperor's clothes are not there.
Right.
That he's naked, and everybody is trying to force themselves to assume that that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I'm so glad to be a follower of Jesus and a lover of Jesus because I don't have to try to resolve these things. They're too massive for one thing. So the shack was such an anomaly. I mean, I write a story for our 6 kids as a Christmas present.
Yeah.
And when I give it to them, which that year we were so broke, it was the only Christmas present I had for them. And I wrote it mostly on the metro to one of my 3 jobs.
Hmm.
And when I gave it to him, it did everything I wanted it to do. I mean, it had never crossed my mind to be a published author or any of that stuff.
Wow.
And went back to work. And it was my friends because I gotten a deal. Office Depot had a sale going on, and I could get 15 copies
Yeah.
um, right then, as opposed to 8 across the street at Kinko's. I only needed 8, but I
Yeah.
could get the extra 7 for the same price. And so I did the Office Depot photocopy thing, and I gave the extra copies to my friends because what am I going to do with them? And went back to work. And I was done. Like it literally did everything I wanted it to do. And but my friends reading it started this chain reaction, and it ends up becoming a thing in the world. And who, like our motto still is, who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Me bringing all my history and trauma and tragedy and the harm that I did to others as well as to myself, and all of that ends up in this little thing that I was finally free enough to create as a gift for
Hmm.
my kids that ends up in being this behemoth, in the world. And
Yeah.
so it's it's still as surreal as it was back then, and it's still
Yeah.
as kind. I mean, it has been so kind. I mean, I've got my people not tend to, some of my people, modern evangelical holiness fundamentalists, they they have their struggles with it, but not as much as they used to. That's
Hmm.
20 years ago that I wrote
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I'm watching the landscape change, and it's kind of it's not a mm, self-promoting thing at all to say, but it was on the cusp. In retrospect, it was on the cusp of a change in the landscape, and the
Yeah.
timing was just right.
Right.
Timing that I was totally unaware of, and
Mm-hmm.
it lands like a bomb in the middle of the world and does this thing. So timing, and here's what it was too. It was art, and it didn't matter to people whether it had really strong faith symbolisms and faith iconic things, and things that I very much believe, like the existence of 3 persons in one essence, the Trinity,
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm very, it is sufficient for me. It satisfies so many of my questions over the years, and yet it crossed all the barriers. You know, I I like to say I have atheist friends who give the shack to my Christian friends, going like, "You need to read this," like,
Wow.
you
Huh.
know, and
Right.
and it did it went all over the place, breaking barriers. And it was
Mm-hmm.
human. The reason is it was human. It was a human story dealing with human stuff,
Right.
and it didn't have a hook in it. It didn't have a, well, now you need to ask Jesus into your life as your personal savior because if you
Yeah.
don't and you die, you're going to eternal conscious torment.
Right.
It didn't have that multi-level marketing taste to it. And
Mm-hmm.
so and I'm talking about people within the context of my people, religious people who've grown up with it, and it was suddenly like, oh my God, he is saying what I've been thinking for years, but I didn't feel safe enough to talk about it. And then those on the outside are like, outside, that's really a bad way to phrase it. Those who are not had not committed themselves to the system of religion, Christian
Mm-hmm.
religion, or, they were reading it and they were going like, boy, I have great sadness in my life. And and the one thing that the shack really gifted me, my friends, my family, was the invitation to walk on the holy ground of other people's shattered stories.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that's holy ground. Every person's a story, and so we naturally are attracted to good story, and
Hmm.
good in the sense of realistic and authentic and beautiful, not necessarily, definitely not without suffering, because we all share that. And and who knew?
If you're enjoying this conversation, I'd invite you to download my free guide, Awakening to the Sacred: 5 Keys to Experiencing the Divine. I hope to, in this guide, help you to unlock a more joyful, creative, and spirit-filled life, especially if you're hungry for a spiritual life that feels real. So check out the show notes and click on the link below to access that free guide. Thanks. Yeah, it put a very real story at the core. It's someone's real struggles, deep struggles, like that, just that idea of the great sadness that
Yeah,
carries so much in it for
yeah,
just 2 words. It really expresses so much.
yeah.
And I think, so much of our experience, even in the church, is that we go to church all buttoned up, cleaned up, washed up, and we pray for other people, but we don't always bring our own great sadness and lay it on the altar or in the middle of the
How
community.
sad is that, right? How
Right.
sad is that? A place that you would think would be a safe place is not a safe place. Not enough to embrace a community that is willing to hear who you are as a story,
Yeah.
right? And it's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. And but I'm an optimist at the core of my being, and I see things changing, and I see people willing to engage in a way that they were not before, and they are willing to even question their assumptions. And part of that came out of technology, right? As soon as you had computers and your little isolated little corner of the world was just ripped open. And if you wouldn't do it, your kids would do it, and you couldn't hide from the questions anymore. So
Yeah.
that was a real facilitator of being shifted in a direction that was not normal or usual or comfortable,
Hmm.
and continues to expand. And all of a sudden, in your little part of your kingdom, you had a voice that is no longer there. It's no, unless you cloister your kingdom together and hide them inside of a box, a building or whatever, and tell them that everybody out there is still dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, so I know there's so much to talk about when we start going down this path. And it's not that religion is not going to hold on to its systems. I mean, that gives people identity and worth and value and significance and security and meaning and purpose and destiny and community and love. Um, it's not an easy release. It's a kind of atheism or a kind of dying
Mm.
that is not comfortable to let go of that which you thought was true, and
Right.
it's not. And it may be in part, which makes it even more seditious in that sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things that the Shack did was it completely overturned people's images of God. Like and especially what we might say were distorted images of God. It offered new images. Like, and I won't say that you are or are not a process theologian. I draw from Whitehead a lot, draw from process theology. It's certainly not my only resource in the
Of
toolkit.
course. Of course.
At my core are, mystical experience and direct encounter, and then using articulations to offer insight into that. But I would say that, what you put forward in the Shack was a God who was relational, a God who works through love and invitation and
Yeah.
presence, not force.
Yeah.
That human freedom is real and God doesn't cause evil, but freedom has consequences, and that results in things happening in the world. But that God continually works to redeem evil and suffers with the world. And
God doesn't actually redeem evil. Evil is unredemptive. And because it's a denial of the good, it has
mm,
no self existence.
right,
And so there's
right,
nothing there to actually redeem. It's, it's, it's the cosmos, it's human beings that the work of redemption is inside of.
yeah,
But, but, but I understand completely what you're saying is that the language, and you and I mean, we're always looking for language to make reality more accessible
hmm,
and not more esoteric. So, uh, yeah, you know, I think in part it didn't just overturn dogmas, but it invited metaphor into our lives.
yeah,
And my people, man, I say sometimes, and it might be a little too cruel, but coming from our histories, we often can't recognize a metaphor. It came up and slapped us in the face. You know,
right,
we don't realize that the fatherhood of God is a metaphor,
exactly,
right?
yeah,
And that Jesus is really human,
hmm,
and but he uses metaphor all the time. I am the
hmm,
bread of life. I am the light. I am the door, right?
right,
So and parables are metaphoric at the core. So metaphor, and again, this is where you're dealing with the beauty of art and as the liminal, as the special place between nonfiction and truth, right? So because metaphor is more an open window or an unveiled window or an open door to truth and mystery. And when we're talking about the divine, we are definitely talking about mystery. Not an
hmm,
unknown mystery, but known in part fundamentally because of that Jesus is the unveiling or is the introduction and the best unveiling that we know of that mystery, of the mystery of the nature and character of both what a human being is
hmm,
and what the divine is.
right,
And that there's coherence between the two, which
hmm,
a lot of
hmm,
us didn't grow up believing that at all.
yeah.
And, so, yeah, the shack. What a thing, eh?
What a thing, eh? So before we pause this first part and then jump into part two, just talk a little bit about what led you, because you've got the new book, Return to the Shack, coming out this fall.
Yeah.
What led you to Return to the Shack?
Um, a group of friends on death row
Yeah.
in Tennessee,
Mm.
in Nashville, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. And that's what turned me. People would ask me all the time after the Shack came out, are you ever going to write a sequel? And I'd say, probably not. I mean, how do you write a sequel for the Shack? I mean, that's kind of not possible.
Right.
And when I wrote Return, which is coming out in October, when I wrote Return, it was an attempt to compare or contrast or compete with the Shack. It's its
Mm.
own thing, but it's within the context of the Shack. And so,
Yeah.
9 years ago, a friend of mine who was working with guys on death row who had changed his life, he says to me one time, there's a guy that's been absolutely transformed by the Shack, particularly the scene in the cave with Sophia.
Mm.
And he got undone by
If
that.
you're
And so
enjoying
he
this
said,
conversation,
if I
I'd
buy a
invite
copy of the
you to
Shack, will you
download my
sign it
free
so I can take
guide,
it in?
Awakening to the
I said,
Sacred,
no.
5 Keys to
I
Experiencing
said,
the
you buy a
Divine.
copy, I'll
I
sign it,
hope to, in this
and then you
guide,
take
help
me
you
in
to
and I can give
unlock
it
a
to
more
him.
joyful,
That
creative,
started
and
this
spirit-filled
9 year
life,
so far relationship
especially
with a
if you're
group of
hungry
guys. It
for a
doesn't
spiritual
last.
life
It
that
doesn't
feels
15
real.
sometimes.
So check out the show notes
And
and click on the link below
which is a
to
good chunk
access
of the
that free guide.
population that is on death
Thanks.
row in Tennessee.
Mm,
And they become my friends. I never did it as a ministry. I understand the word, but I'm not exactly fond of the word. It smacks a little bit of superiority and separation. I'm
yeah.
coming rooted, but I'm a missionary kid, so I may still have a chip on my shoulder, maybe. But generally speaking, I I don't want to walk in the world as if I got a corner on anything,
Yeah.
right? I'm a human being relating to human beings. I'm in the presence of transcendent beings, whether they know it or not, and I'm honored, right? So in my relationship with the guys, they become friends. They know who my family is. They they call me. They send me stuff. When my dad died, and we buried him. In the U.S., you bury people. In Canada, you bury them. So we buried him up in British Columbia, and I got home, and there was a card waiting for me from, the guys, and
Wow.
they're so sweet and so generous and kind and caring and compassionate toward me. And so because of them, a few years ago, I started, and this is kind of how my writing happens anyway. I don't write with any agenda. I don't write with a target audience in mind. I just don't. And but I started thinking, little nudges here and there, like, wait, in the shack, I have a serial killer, right? Probably considered the worst of the worst,
Yeah.
um, a child killer.
Right.
And what if he ends up on death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Tennessee? What would that be like?
Mm,
And what if it's a few years later down the road from the abduction and the murder of Missy? Well, what if Mac has to actually face this human being
mm,
rather than forgiving the idea of a person, which is legit? I mean,
sure.
people that we need to forgive, a lot of them are dead, and a bunch of them
Yeah.
don't care.
Yeah.
And so forgiveness is not for the sake of the other. It's not for the sake of the person who did the harm. It's for my sake so that I can become free to live a life without the impediment and the poison of an
Yeah.
event or what a person has done or that person.
Right.
And so what would that be like? And meanwhile, what has happened in Mac's life? He had this incredible, transcendent, unveiling experience with God. Was everything fixed? Is he now living in a really, has he now got it together and we can now listen to Mac and we can see that, okay, there's wisdom. And so would a sequel just have a whole bunch of the wisdom of Mac? Or how is he actually working this out? Because frankly, if anyone that is listening has had any kind of a remarkable experience with God, they know, or mushrooms,
Right. Right.
or
Exactly. Yeah.
some kind of this thing that happens to them, and they know that it didn't fix stuff.
Right.
It felt like in retrospect that it was a shortcut to something, but now the work has just as much needed to be done as it was back then.
Yeah.
And so
Or you have to find a way to connect what you experienced and integrate it into your life that you still have to live on a day-to-day basis. And how do you
yeah,
bring those two together in a way that's coherent?
yeah. So I got somebody who wrote, um, they thought they were whole and good, and then they got married. You know, you so many single people are fundamentally selfish, and that's not an accusation, that's an observation. That's because
Hmm.
they Richard, we were driving along one day, and this was right at the same time as the conference. This was like the day before the conference, and we were talking about stuff, and he says, Paul, this may be very strange coming from a celibate Franciscan. He's Franciscan, yeah,
Yeah.
monk. But I believe, he said, this is him talking, I believe that one of the greatest gift, if not the greatest gift, that God ever gave humanity was marriage. And he says, because it puts you in close proximity with somebody who will push your buttons.
Yeah.
And and so what happens is that you either then dominate them to control them so that you feel better about yourself, and or you just hide, you just
Mm.
disappear inside,
Right.
but the relationship is still there enticing you to transcend your own crap.
Hmm.
And supposedly it's not easy to find your way out of it. That is,
Mm.
it's become something because of the vows, because we want to turn our covenantal relationship into a contract, then we can break it a lot easier, which is what a lot of people do now.
Yeah.
Um, but the very fact that we are inside of that kind of union, especially if a child is born into it, I mean, it gets more and more complicated. So you had this great experience with God. Now what?
Right.
How does this work itself out? And you see that in Mac's life. You see him. It's like Kate, his daughter, if you remember.
Yep.
Kate says to him at one point, "Do you think it was real?"
Hmm.
And Mac says, "You mean the shack and all that?" And they have this conversation about, was it real? Was it true? Was it true?
Hmm.
And you see the ripple effect of real life. I mean, actual lived life into your relationship with God and into your need for certainty and your sense of functioning within the capacity and the ownership of control. That trust trust is not an easy thing in a world of betrayal of one sort or another. And
Yeah.
betrayal in marriage is just like one of the worst kinds of betrayal. And in the Hebrew scripture, the betrayal of adultery, spiritual adultery as well as physical adultery, was considered a actual covenant breaking thing.
Mm.
And, that you know, we had a tribe in New Guinea. I'm a missionary kid, and we had a tribe in New Guinea where, which is now West Papua, and the greatest good inside of that tribe, over the who knows centuries, had developed that the greatest good was to befriend somebody from the outside of the community, welcome them in, make them a part of the family, and then kill them and betray them. The
Yeah.
highest good was betrayal. And
Whoa.
so when the missionaries came in and started telling the stories of Jesus, the hero of the story was Judas.
Whoa. Gosh.
Judas. They said, ah, he's just like us. And their system was so upside down that they considered betrayal the highest good, like the greatest thing you could accomplish in your life.
Wow. Wow.
So so you know the the good news of Jesus had to find a different way in, and it did. There
Yeah.
was something within the culture that absolutely opened up the Jesus story. A
Hmm.
beautiful thing, which we won't go into, but again, so those are things that were reasons that I started looking at it. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized there is a lot of stuff uh, that still is to be addressed. And I
Hmm.
wrote it for my friends. I wrote it for the one who is out there somewhere. And I wrote it for myself.
Yeah.
And I do. When I write, I just explore and let the story take me. And and like nonfiction, which is the data takes me, right?
Hmm.
In fiction, the story takes you,
Yeah.
and uh, and I end up following the character, and the characters begin to take on a life of their own. It's pretty marvelous. It's pretty
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, and well, and before we close here, for those who may not hear part two of our discussion, I just want to say, you sent me a PDF of Return to the Shack, and I loved it. I thought it was a gripping, beautiful, beautiful story that had so much richness to it. So it's a worthy sequel. And well, like you said, it's a book that stands on its own, but
Yeah.
it's definitely something that I'm going to recommend to people.
I've had friends go, I hate to say this, but I kind of like it better than The Shack. And I
Huh.
say, well, that's because you read The Shack. Your context includes The Shack. But if
Yeah.
where I work, the easiest way to compare the two is that The Shack is a solo and Return is a choir.
Mm. Yeah.
And when I say that, you can understand exactly what I mean, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many interweavings of the different people involved, and they
Character
also,
development.
yeah, they all support each other and, come together in beautiful ways.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's pause here and then we'll come right back with part two. Thanks for listening to the first half of this episode. If you'd like to go deeper, click on the link in the show notes to access the full episode for paid subscribers of The Sacred Everywhere on Substack. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this episode far and wide. I'd love your help to grow this channel. Until next time, may you notice the sacred everywhere.